Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to Conclave. This is season 2 and the last episode of the year. So also beforehand, wishing all of you a Merry Christmas and a fantastic 2022. It's been a brilliant, brilliant year. It's been a fabulous experience co-hosting this with Fiona. Fiona curated the first 6 episodes in terms of getting the poets in. I did the last 6 sessions. And it's been a really terrific time we've had. And the feedback, I mean, on the Twitter, some people have been saying that, the best poetry events of the year kind of thing twice. Zoe Brooke, I think, if I remember correctly, who's online right now, tweeted a bunch of things. So a very warm welcome. We will start with Major.
We will, but first of all, I will join SUDEEP in welcoming you as your co-host. It has been an astonishing year. It's been a great privilege to do this. We're going out on a bang, as they say, in rather sort of dodgy language, but we are going out with an absolutely tremendous final episode of the year. It's an enormous privilege to have 3 such exceptional poets from 3 such strikingly different traditions reading tonight. But I think that all 3 of you probably know each other, which is also lovely because of that sense of, friendships forged across continents and not only on Zoom, but in the olden days, in the room as well. I can't wait for this session. So SUDEEP.
Thank you. So I've put Major's bio on the side, as you can see, but I will read it out formally. Major Jackson is the author of 5 books of poetry, including The Absurd Man, Roll Deep, Holding Company, Hoops, and Leaving Saturn, which won the KHALED Poetry Prize for first book of poems. He's edited volumes include Best American Poetry 2019, Renga for Obama, and the Library of America's County Cullen Collected Poems. A recipient of fellowships of the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Guggenheim, National Endowments for the Art, Radcliffe Institute for Dance Studies at Harvard University. Jackson has been awarded a Pushcart Prize, a Whiting Award, honored by the Pew Fellowship, Witter-Binner Foundation in conjunction with the Library of Congress. He has published poems and essays in American Poetry Review, The New Yorker, Orion Magazine, Paris Review, Plowshares, Poetry, etc. He lives in Nashville, where he's currently the Gertrude Conway Vanderbilt Chair in the Humanities at the university there. And he also serves as the poetry editor of the Harvard Review. Major, what a privilege to have you. We've had your wife before, and it's interesting that there are so many combination of poet families here. So a very, very warm welcome, Major.
Welcome, Major.
Thank you. Thank you very much, SUDEEP and Fiona. What a pleasure, enormous pleasure and honor to read with VAZHYNA and KHALED, 2 poets who obviously I admired for a long time. Speaking of being in the room, Fiona, we never met, but we were in the same room a decade ago in Athens. You were hosting an event. I think it was an exchange between British poets and Greek poets.
Greek translators. I didn't know you were there.
Of course you didn't. I was up in the rafters, and it was an exciting event. It was long.
It was very long. It was Greek.
It was my friend, I believe my friend Harris. I met Harris subsequently after that, some years later. And I when I met him, I said, man, you give very long readings. So I'm hoping this is going to be a short reading.
This is going to be a short, highly professional reading, as well as glorious.
And thank you, friends who are in the room. It's a pleasure seeing you all. I'm gonna start off with, I'm gonna mostly read new poems, and I'll maybe end with a poem from this book that published just before the pandemic, The Absurd Man. But I'm gonna read mainly new poems written in the past 6 months. This is titled Making Things, Something We Do. Suddenly, I had to skewer all my prayers and slow roast them in the open air kitchen of my imagination. I had to shovel fire into my laughter and keep my eyes from blinking. I had to fuss like an old grandmother cooking a holiday storm. Flour on the wooden island, pans lined with parchment, cast iron skillets whisking flat gravy, in short, simmering potions. I had to move like a ballet dancer, but without the vanity and self-consciousness of tradition. I had to blur my scars so I could write into joy and carry the sensation of walking like a morose and heavy American with a yellow ascot over Pont Saint-Michel. I want to be all razzle-dazzle before the dark cloaked one arrives for a last game of chess. My font of feelings shall pour like a waterfall, and I shall live as if no toupees exist on earth, or masks that silence the oppressed, or anything that does not applaud the sycamore's tribute to the red flame, like the heat beneath my grandmother's pots, who never raised a ghost. So look at me, standing on the porch, laughing at the creek, threatening to become a raging river. Of wolves and imagination, in memory of Barry Lopez. Every so often, one has to make a sound of terrible pain, as though in boundless woods, among thorns and berries, prowling through bramble and tangled vines, whose presence is a green fog. One has to leave a candlelit dinner at 11 Madison Park with its white linen sad as milk and silverware tenderly laid out like an embarrassment of torture. And one has to gaze into the chambers of a soon empty heart and return to the kingdom of creatures and give up the measured silence of the respectable, whose desire and gasping breaths dangle as though from a string of floss, all squeaky mirth and nothing more. Every so often, one has to make a sound like a massive season kept in the pocket, like a souvenir for when the temperature changes. The imagination is a matinee of memories with a side of parsley, like this one, wishes tossed into a public fountain like a nickel, which is to say, the skies are burning indigo and your breath can be anything possible, raucous as a church service or the quiet crunch of leaves, earth's golden confetti held between palms. Consider this song a thumb on a highway looking for work.
Marvelous, wonderful.
Courtship. The Elmer in this poem, for those of you who are not familiar with 1970s, 80s cartoons, is Elmer Fudd. Courtship. I treasure any man who fashions his walk after the woodcock's sky dance, and any woman who turns her neck so that her body resembles a candle. So we glance on all her secret fires and wonder, where do we come from? What fording place, what delicacies of light the Dutch masters caught divining a window or bowl of figs and dates. We cannot afford any more Elmers bayoneting children on the streets of Oakland, or algal blooms declaring war on the cormorant, or the bad debts of the Tennessee warbler who has just resumed on my shingled roof his mortal complaint of our ingenious takeovers. Hey, are you blazing like Vermeer's paintbrush? Is Saint Pedro at heaven's gate begging for your DNA? Some gentle Roman soldier rafts his last dying prayer in Camden. Halftime commercials erase our trample marks. How do I know you're not climbing the lines of this poem, folding the dark into your hearts? Speaking of Elmers bayoneting children on the streets of Oakland, this is from a long series that I've been writing for a number of years called Urban Renewal. And this is one of its latest entries. It's after a painter named Adjuan Mance. Adjuan's been doing these wonderful portraits of African-American men. He was there all along, sporting a V-neck, a treatise on swagger with his double-hooped earrings, and an olive beanie or neon green knitted cap, or a kufi as he crocheted prayers from his enduring lips. You saw him, but didn't see him. His eyes like skylights, the meatiness of his nose, a civil mustache gelling his mouth, his placid look of acceptance in a checkout line, his chiseled almond dignity on a train platform nearby as you swiped and tapped. He lives at the rich margins of your fictions, away for a pride in a bakery or a gallery, reading a canvas, a smidge of his total being, son, father, mentor, friend, educator, artist, chemist, barber, or chef. Sometimes you have to train the ear to suspend what dark distortions that leave you deaf as a mirror. For even his yearbook smile is nuance until he becomes martyr, a reason to march. Then you only see his death and all those cops. This is also from Urban Renewal, another entry. We wouldn't have those eyes, all criminal and unfeeling as walnuts. We'd have the eyes of saints, the kind you collapse into, outsized tender chapels, their own melodies. We'd be heroic unto each other and escort the diseased and the princes across doors with no thresholds. We be one another's threshold. All the news reports celebrate how we lifted the wanderers and war with mohair horrors out of lectures above the dream crushers and into a blue kingdom with poems as fertilizers. Yes, they are in debt, having paid for duende and Dionysian dreams. And we are tired having walked the journey to their graves, neighing at the sight of judges and the new Herods. But white lilacs already swarm our airports, and tyranny hides in the cattails. We are trying to stay, and the art form requires barrels and barrels of apples.
Mm.
We are living in Nashville now, 18 years in the northern New England landscape, something very different here in Nashville, but we're embracing it. Difference is good, change is good in one's life. There are all manner of people celebrating in a certain part of this town on flatbeds. Many of them are about to lunge into marriages, but they're going to celebrate here in Nashville first. Nashville sonnet deconstructed on a bed of magnolia blossoms. In this city, no one talks dialectical materialism. From high up, the cranes speak an invisible language. The trusses extend over pedal taverns and tractors, joyriding flatbeds of dancing tourists. And it is like reading God's lip. En garde, she says. Today, I am landscaping staking light across my wintergreen yard to get the worm's perspective, to beg his forgiveness. I am reaching fingers into darkest soil, pondering the afterlife. A house wren flouts its surefire code to all this achy, breaky singing. Such intricate phrasing, like a compass behind Jacopo's feathered quill pen. Who doesn't want to live in a city of acoustic martyrs addicted to heartbreak? Plus this, even the magnolias, vulnerable each spring, court a delicious despair and still burst their creamy fat blossoms like spark plugs for the living.
Lovely.
I'm coming to a close. Let me begin again. Let me begin again as a quiet thought in the shape of a shell, slowly examined by a brown child on a beach at dawn, straining to see their future. Let me begin again, this time knowing the drumming in my dreams is me inheriting the earth, is morning lighting up the rivers. Let me burn my vanities, old music in the pines, sifters of scotch, a day moon like a signature of night. This time, let me circle the islands of my fears only once, then live like a raging waterfall and grow a magnificent mustache. Let me not ever be the birdcage or the serrated blade or the empty season. Dear glacier, dear sea of stars, dear leopards disintegrating at the outer limits of our greed. Soon we will encounter you only in motivational tweets. Reader, I should have married you sooner. This time, let me not sleep like the prophet who believes he's seen infinity. Let me run at breakneck speeds toward sceneries of doubt. I have no more dress rehearsals to attend. Look closer, I am licking my lips. And yeah. Sudeep said 15 minutes. Yep. And I'm going to read 2 poems from The Absurd Man.
Great.
This is a poem titled, Now That You Are Here, I Can Think. What you really are is svelte, the mainland of your feelings, a young Veronica Webb, and what we share are solutions, and not so much the Parisian air you tired of, nor the fat, sweaty bead coursing a décolletage, an unlikely consequence of the Kyoto Protocol, but the pleasures of lounging below French-style windows open wide as arms, whose blousy curtain is a shawl that formally hangs and then formally shifts when you drift into the room like a Spike Lee dolly shop. The kids are dancing to some Ariana, but I'm watching what you do with your lips when reading silently around 4:22 p.m. on a late Sunday afternoon. I have a weakness for marble winding stairs and tight 2-person elevators, but the brasseries are waiting, as well as the football fans who need help cheering, for we are Americans after all, and are ready to hype even the locusts on the day of judgment. I don't care about the midfielder or the winger. You're smiling, and that's all the defending I'll ever need. And finally, double major. I emerge whenever he confuses the lamp for a moon. It is then he thinks of fine bindings and ordered Athenaeums. I own his face, but he watches and spends too little time behind his ears. He sees me in the mirror behind thick clouds of shaving cream, then suddenly believes in ghosts. His other selves are murals in the cave of his mind. They are speechless, yet large. They stare his wishes like summer rain and amplify his terrors like newscasters. What he doesn't know, his dreams are his father's dreams, which are his grandfather's dreams, and so on. They possessed a single wish. He knocks repeatedly on the bolted door to his imagination. Tragically, he believes he can mend his wounds with his poetry, and thus I am his most loyal critic. He trots me out like a police dog. He calls our thirst for pads and pencils destiny. Our voices come together like two wings of a butterfly. On occasion, he closes his eyes and sees me. I am negative capability. The test to all men are created equal. We are likely to dance at weddings against my will. He pulled out the same moves writing this poem, a smooth shimmy and a hop. This page is a kind of looking glass, making strange whatever stone carvings he installed along the narrow road to his interior. I suffer in silence, wedded to his convictions. He would like to tell you the truth about love, but we are going to bed, to bed. Thank you for your attention. It's a pleasure. I can't wait to hear VAZHYNA and KHALED and to engage in the talk. Thanks.
Fantastic, fantastic. What a beautiful reading, Major.
Thank you so much, Major, for your extraordinary range. It's so rare to hear poetry which is stretching in all directions at once, you know, from dialectical materialism to the detail, the shifting fabric. It's just it's a ride. It's fantastic. It's just, yeah, extraordinary. I was wondering who your forefathers are. I mean, who are your models and your, you know?
There's so many. I think publicly I've acknowledged Gwendolyn Brooks and Philip Levine, but there's Brodsky and that whole crew, Seamus and Walcott. It's a global mix of folks, and I would bore you just listing a bunch of names.
But your writing is looser limbed than each of them, isn't it? Which is
what was
fantastic.
that? It's loose.
Your
what?
writing is looser limbed than each of those figures.
Yeah, it can be.
Glorious,
definitely.
stretch and encompassing, and then stretch and encompassing, and stretch and encompassing.
For sure. And I think that's by necessity of the age that we are kind of living in. You know, I think one has to have a healthy regard for tradition, but one also has to kind of rep the moment that they're living in, and to some extent, the language and the mind has to be limber enough, and one's relationship to language has to be limber enough to kind of encompass the speed and the velocity of the moment that we're living in. So,
and the speed and velocity of ideas, because that's sure. There too, strikingly.
That's right. And otherwise it becomes all calcified and, like here in the US, repetitive of ideologies that kind of shackle the possibilities of being humane and being human. And the art can reflect that. The art can kind of bring in the width of all manner of experiences. My difficulty is I don't believe we are spending as much attention to cultivating readers that can appreciate the width of experiment, the width of possibilities with language. I think, you know, at the worst end of it all is the kind of hallmark sentiment. And then at the other end can be a kind of dissipation where all meaning is thrown to the wind. So there's a sweet spot to kind of writing towards, and every poem is a journey towards that. But I do believe we need readers that we need to cultivate readers who appreciate a poem as an experience with language rather than a mirror or of their own kind of worlds and realities. So
yes, poems as description,
yeah.
or poems as confession have limits, don't they? Sorry, Shadeep.
Which is why, Major, I think, I mean, I've known your poetry for a long time, since your first book. And when I hear you read out aloud, and especially some of your newer work, I see a very, very definite anchoring in tradition. You are, of course, talking about it's important to branch out and make yourself more contemporary as times go by. But the basic resonant tone in your poetry is very, very anchored in a particular kind of tradition, which comes from, I suspect, what you call the tribe, the sort of declamatory, incantatory cadence, which say people like Walcott and Brodsky and Heaney bring to the table. And you just add your inflections to it. Of course, you stretch it, but talk about tradition, because, you know, even though we are talking about expanding of our vision, a lot of new readers I find, when you engage with them for more than half an hour, first 10 minutes, they can be very impressive. But if you engage with them for more than half an hour, you realize actually the past knowledge of poetics is kind of very, very threadbare.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if you're kind of deep into the oracular, the oracular as well as the lyric, the kind of song-like qualities that has always animated the art, you're constantly looking for models. And I have friends who are musicians, and they do not limit themselves to just one particular rhythm. Their curiosity drives them towards picking up as many strands of melodies and sounds. And I think so much of, I think at least education here in the US, particularly on MFA programs, should be grounded in absorbing as many of those models, particularly the oracular. What do poems sound like in Southeast Asia? What do poems sound like in Northern Europe? What do poems sound like in South America? I'm really curious about that. And so that requires one to kind of absorb and just read and listen. And fortunately, in this day and age, we can do this. We can kind of cross boundaries.
Mm.
Yes.
I mean, which is why one of the automatic remits which Fiona and I kind of lean towards is the internationalism of poetry. It's so important. But sadly speaking, and you're talking about MFA programs, which is a very specific kind of a construct or a vessel, and that has been replicated in the UK as well, and interestingly slowly permeating into other parts of the world. But the problem with that is when I see the courses or the range of poets who are being taught in these, it's very, very myopic. You know, we are talking about internationalism, but 20%, probably 15% of the world's good poetry is actually being taught, and you know what I mean exactly.
Yeah.
And that's true in literature studies too, isn't it? It's not only true in creative writing programs, right. It's true of literature and comparative literature programs. There's terrible tendency still to read the poem as a crossword puzzle, which has to be resolved. What does it mean?
Well,
yes.
Instead of, this kind of
called saline consciousness, i.e. saline i.e. one is only aware of one's shores. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
It's a pleasure, doesn't it? Enormously. Yes. Oh, thank you so much, Major. Are we moving on to VAZHYNA, Shadeep? And shall I introduce her?
Yes, do that, please. Yes.
Well, VAZHYNA and I have been in the room together. I've been an admirer of her work since, something like 2004 in Villanica, where I gave her the festival prize. And she was just this extraordinary phenomenon, like nothing. And, it's a very international, that was a very international festival, but, she was like nothing else there and like nothing else that any of us had come across. And that kind of tremendous steely, she's like a steel ball, that tremendous concentration of her poetic concentration, the concentration of her poetic concentration is just this extraordinary force that still powers her work. She also is a tremendous witness to the continuing tragedy of Belarus, but that is today, at least, secondary to our celebration of her extraordinary poetry. So I'm going to read your bio, VAZHYNA. So VAZHYNA MORT is a poet and translator born in Minsk in Belarus. She's the author of 3 poetry collections: Factory of Tears, which was Copper Canyon in 2008, Collected Body, 2011, and most recently, Music for the Dead and Resurrected, which is FSG in 2020. And it was named one of the best poetry books of the year by 2020 by New York Times, and won the International Griffin Poetry Prize. It's fantastic. Mort is a recipient of fellowships from the American Academy in Rome, the Lannan Foundation, and the Amy Clampett Foundation. She's received the National Endowment for the Arts grant in translation for her work on Polina Barskowska's book of selected poems, Air Raid, which came from Ugly Duckling this year. She teaches at Cornell and writes in English and Belarusian, which is another of her literary marvels. I mean, extraordinary. It's a huge pleasure to welcome you, VAZHYNA.
Well, Gina, a very, very warm welcome. It's lovely to see you again.
Thank you so much, Sudeep and Fiona. Thank you, Fiona, for reminding me of our meeting in Villanica. It was one of my first trips outside of Belarus. So everything to me seemed very strange too and new. And I think it was my first poetry prize, which is very, very unexpected. And I'm grateful for it because it gave me a sense of, support, that I have readership and support in the world. And that was very important. And now I'm really trying to psych myself for my own work, because I really loved listening to Major, and I love The Absurd Man, the 2 last poems he read from that book. But the new poems are just amazing. And they might be new, but I think they have an old soul, as they say of people. Yeah, it's the kind of poems that I feel like I've been loving them for years because I love poetry. So thank you so much. Let me try to try to find my rhythm by force. I have to force myself because I would like to stay in this space that Major you have created for us with the poems and with that wonderful conversation. It's just a pleasure to read here. A sandwich between Major and Khaled is the most wonderful, delicious poetry sandwich. I'm very happy to be a part of it. So I will read from Music for the Dead and Resurrected. I did work on some new poems even this morning, but the poems in this book insist on remaining new because just recently I was editing them again for the UK edition of this book. So I just cannot stop writing them and rewriting them. Okay. Bus stops, Ars Poetica. With the 3 first poems, I'm taking you to Minsk, Belarus. So a little bit of virtual travel. Not books, but a street. Open my mouth like a doctor's spatula. One by one, streets introduce themselves with the names of national murderers. In the state archives, covers hardened like scabs over the ledges. Inside a tiny apartment, I built myself into a separate room. Inside a tiny apartment, I built myself into a separate room, peopled it with the Calibans of plans for the future. Future that runs on the schedule of public buses, from the zoo to the circus. What future? What is your alibi for these ledges, these streets, this apartment? Future. In the purse that held through 7 wars the birth certificates of the dead, my grandmother hid from me chocolates. The purse opened like a screaming mouth. The purse opened like a screaming mouth. Its 2 shiny buckles watched me through doors, through walls, through jazz. Who has taught you to be a frightening face, purse? I kiss your buckles. I swear myself your subject. August, apples. I have nobody. August, for me, a ripe apple is a brother. For me, a 4-legged table is a pet. In the temple of supermarket, I stand like a candle in the line to the priestesses who preserve the knowledge of sausage prices, the virginity of milk cartons. My future, small change. Future that runs on the schedule of public buses. Streets introduce themselves with the names of national murderers. I build myself into a separate room where memory, the illegal migrant in time, cleans up after imagination. In a room where memory strips the beds, linens that hardened like scabs on the mattresses. I kiss little apples, my brothers. I kiss the buckles that watch us through walls, through years, through jazz, chocolates from a purse that held through 7 wars the birth certificates of the dead. Hold me, brother apple.
What a brilliant start. Wonderful.
State of light. A girl, I sing in the boys' choir. Mine is a city defaced with light's acid. Among the amphitheaters of boys' mouths, my body, a slice of nothing. Muse with 2 tongues where wings should be. I begin with music thrown onto meat scales. In the city of acid, light speaks with the thin lips of streets, the thick lips of avenues, strings of light stretched in the doorways of milk and meat shops. Music thrown onto meat scales by saleswomen defaced with light's acid, by saleswomen whose hands are square like picture frames. Our saleswomen who never see themselves in the canvases of great masters have the most pictorial lips, arches of finest architecture, triumphant arches built for their language of contempt. They despise our hunger. A child's place is in a choir, not at the table. They despise our money. Children shouldn't touch money. Money is the genitals of our state. We fry light to the screams of light, and we live on light in this innocent city defaced with light's acid, built not on bones, not on bones, not on bones, not on bones, not one splinter of human bones in our earth. We can lower our hands into our earth as into water. And my history book is stuffed like sausage. Verily, in your image, I hover in the glory of fish shops, in the chlorine of classrooms. In my stomach is the midnight of bread, the abyss of cognac. As a species, I'm closest to a screw that loosens regularly. In a Rembrandt black bathroom, a girl child, illiterate, washes me left to right. My illiterate child crosses and underlines with a soaked sponge what you've made in your image. She wasn't born. She stood up and threw me off her back like the skin of an animal. I know a word for this, but don't ask me. Ask a cow, ask a dog. Verily, except for Rembrandt's right cheek, it is dark. Having picked a handful of vines, Caravaggio honestly paints the dirt under his fingernails. No, honest historians, this dirt does not mean decay. Under the charred nails, orchard, origin, and I'm a screw that loosens regularly. In its uncharted dark, women washing each other in the light of their cheeks, in the light of their knees. And this next poem is called To Antigone, a Dispatch. It has a musical epigraph, the 4 parts of a symphony. Allegro for shooing off the police, adagio for washing the body, scherzo for soft laughter and tears, rondo for covering the body with good earth. As you remember, Antigone invites her sister to help her in the burial of their brother, and the sister Ismena refuses because she doesn't dare to break the king's rules. And so I suggest to Antigone that she should redirect this question to some Belarusian poets. Antigone, dead siblings are set. As for the living, pick me for a sister. I too love a proper funeral. Drag digging sisters, pop up, burial. Landlady, I make the rounds of graves, keeping up my family's top-notch properties. On a torture instrument called an accordion, I stretch my fingers into the finger bones of a witch. My guts have been emptied like bellows for the best sound. Once we settle your brother, I'll show you forests of the unburied dead. We'll clean the way only 2 sisters can clean a house. No bones scattered like dirty socks, no ashes at the bottom of bone china. Why bicker with husbands about dishes when we've got mountains of skulls to shine? Labor and retribution will share, not girly secrets. Brought up by dolls and monuments, I have the bearing of a horse and a bitch. I'm cement in tears. You can spot my graves from afar, marble like newborn skin. Here, history comes to an end, like a movie with rolling credits of headstones, with uncredited rolls of mass graves. Every ditch, every hill is suspect. Pick me for a sister, Antigone. In this auspicious land, I have a bright shovel of a face. And now I'll read the last poem. And kind of we've been in Minsk and its surroundings, but now we'll travel to United Kingdom. And this last poem is set in winter in Liverpool. And my friend, poet and scholar Sandeep Parmar makes an appearance here. Poet's biography. There is one more unnamed dead poet who is, well, the main character of this poem. I do keep his name a secret, but since Adam Zagayevsky's passing, I love to dedicate this poem to him. There's a train metaphor here, and there are lots of poems in Adam's books set in trains. So now every time I read it, I think not of the poet who is actually in this poem, but of Adam. I picked your book from Sandeep's shelf. The poet's biography read, Lives and Teaches. Though the book was fairly recent, it was no longer true. I almost met you once. An almost meeting I remember clearly because of my embarrassment. I was having loud sex in a hotel room while you stood knocking at the door, wanting to give me your book. Now the trains stand frozen in a winter storm, and I pity the trains as if they were shivering butterflies, a whole herd of them, the last of their kind, stuck in the snow England has never seen. Sandeep is cooking dinner. You are dead. The lover's gone. Your book in my frost-bitten hands. Thank
What a
you.
brilliant reading. What a brilliant reading. Yes.
Oh, I wanted it to go on longer. That was wonderful. I didn't realize you'd finished. Just extraordinary. Thank you so much, VAZHYNA. I mean, obviously, you know, you are such a musician with words, but I just always hear in you that, forgive me, Russian, I'm sure Belarusian too, tradition, that absolute confidence with the biggest of symbols. I mean, it's like listening to, you know, Satava or someone like that, or Bloch, or someone in that generation is reading. It's just extraordinary. And so many of those poems I knew really quite well, but I've never heard you read them. So that was a joy and a real surprise. Perhaps you could actually tell us, because not everybody has heard that kind of performance, a little bit to begin with, just about the reading, the performance tradition. We talked about the oracular with Major that you come from.
Yeah, he inspired me. I felt like I had to step up. It's just his reading was so wonderful. And then you spoke about the oracular tradition, and I felt the pressure yet to deliver. But the truth is, yeah, that I do enjoy reading poetry out loud, and poetry and language are alive, right? And so I am a horrible singer, and I have absolutely no ear for music, which has been proven by a decade of daily music practice, which was mostly forced on me, and also by about 10 years spent on the stage of the opera theater in Minsk, where there was a studio for children, and we appeared in certain operas that usually call for little boy choirs. And but I was good on the stage, right? I am a kind of a shy person who really loves to be on the stage, and is transformed by the stage. So they kept me there despite my total inability to sing. And so for 10 years, I opened my mouth. I was not allowed to make sounds when I was on the stage, but I spent 10 years opening my mouth on the stage of the opera theater. And obviously all of this has prepared me for the poetry readings. Now I feel that I'm getting back to all those years of a silently open mouth.
But having heard that lovely story, I have to say that the musical part of poetry is very much present in your poetry. I mean, it's. I mean, of course, you know, the Russian poetry, when it's read out aloud, has its own wonderful sort of bass inflected resonance, you know, and
Incantatory.
Yes, and they're long poems. They tend to be long poems, very, very, at least, you know, a certain age, the poems were not short. So the music part is very much there, but I completely agree with Fiona. Just the image making, the surprising juxtaposition of images or words and phrases. You just, it's like you just throw us off and then you bring us back in, and it's all very swift, like a sort of, razor sharp fencing match. Constructionally, because I see the poems on the page, even though when you read it out, there's a sort of cohesion of lyricism, constructionally on the page, I see the poems laid out in a kind of a staccato, fragmented manner. Do you want to talk about that aspect a little bit?
Yeah, I think that, well, I think that first I'll start with imagery. I think that I come from a rather absurd reality, a reality that is often kind of illogical, inhumane, perhaps. When I speak from it, I feel that the only way to speak from it is to speak really daringly, is to kind of outperform the absurdity of that reality with my work. I grew up reading Daniil Harm's Russian absurdist, who writes a lot about violence in a very obscene, grotesque way. And that's what's kind of very important for me in terms of tradition, not so much kind of the words that are used a lot these days are like trauma and all of that. That's rather secondary to me. And I feel that those words always lead to a very sentimental conversation. But I like the idea of obscenity and grotesque, the kind of carnivalesque of the absurdist literature. And so that's why the grotesque imagery, I feel, is my way to be noticed. I'm a small girl who grew up in this overpopulated microregion on the outskirts of Minsk. And so I feel like I have to outperform my reality often. And in terms of construction, it is musical. I think that for me, a poem is form. And what is form is hard to say because it's both rhythm and pitch and intonation and the melody. And what's also very important is that it's not one, but there is a variation to it. So I try to stuff more or less a large musical form into what ends up a page or 2 pages of a poem.
As with your symphony,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And something I really noticed too is the way you use repetition, and it shows us that a poem is an action. You have a sense of you in action, you having the thought, or you coming back and having the thought again. It's like a kind of bounce or a rebound that is very, very strong and active, and quite different from the way someone like D.H. Lawrence used repetition, which was more to show the labor. But again, I suppose it was poetry as action, but the labor of, no, not this, but maybe this, but maybe this. You're not saying not this, you're saying this. And in fact, this let me bounce off it again and bounce higher. And
yeah, thank you. I think that I love the idea of labor. That's because it's true. This repetition does a lot. Repetition takes us back to that oracular tradition, and it carries all kinds of labors. For me, repetition is the surprise. That kind of amazed looking back and saying, did I just write that? Did I just say that? What was that? And so, and that sense of awe that is as sublime as it is comical. It's a little bit like a person who does bad jokes, and feels like nobody's laughing, so I'm going to repeat it. Yeah. And so I'm going to try it again. I'm going to roll it again. But I like also the claustrophobia of repetition. And that's something more violent and more frightening to play with, that kind of the other side of this comism, because I love the sense of tragicomedy when you're laughing and that then you're scared of the thing that you were laughing at, and then you're laughing again because you were scared of something that you were not supposed to be scared of. And so that not being sure whether to laugh or to be scared of when you are in that claustrophobic a circle of repetition.
You know, and one of the interesting things also, again, when I sort of visually see the poems, and as you're reading it, and my reading of your poems on the page, of course, much quieter and more private. But it's interesting. It's interesting to see, say, the way you signpost certain kinds of phrase makings. For instance, drag, dig, and sisters pop-up burial. I mean, that's funny, really funny. At the same time, the other side of it is, you know, the way you say bone, and more bones, you know, which is a sort of more high poetry, traditional in a sense.
Well, and horror.
It's clearly you're very aware of the kind of juxtaposing the two kind of contrary elements. And in fact, it's not quite contrary. It's sort of seamless in one way. By the time you come to the end of the poem, it's seamless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I myself, when I read the work of poets I love, I read it very quietly and calmly, and that's what I enjoy most. But I love performing, and
Yes.
for me, it's you are talking about the way the poems are laid out. Before readings, I often do extra layout with a pen, the way kind of a conductor would do.
I do remember when those very first performances, you know, you had your poems from memory, and they were laid out in time as well. They were, the performance was extremely, performative, extremely rhythmic. It was extremely, I don't mean it was exactly the same each time, but because of various things, you read sometimes the same poem more than once in the festival. And there was this sense of it is a particular performance, like a song. It's definitely a form, an oral form, not just a form on the page. And we know that about poetry, but because you had it kind of not sealed inside and not enclosed inside, but because you had it formed as a performance as well as formed on the page, one had a really strong sense of that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fiona and Sudeep.
It's a great pleasure, and thank you for a wonderful reading.
Yes.
And it's a joy to be moving on.
Yes, I mean, I don't know who's going to match who, because these are three very powerful readers of their poetry. Not only they're very good poets on the page, bloody hell, but they read like demons or demonesses. So now you'll have from the Arabic world another master, KHALED MATTAWA, all old friends here, of course. And let me just formally read out your bio. It's also on the chat. Let me just pull it up. Yes, KHALED MATTAWA is the author of 5 books of poetry, most recently Fugitive Atlas, Grey Wolf 2020. He's also the author of Mahmoud Darwish, The Poet's Art and His Nation, a critical study of the great Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish, and How Long Have You Been With Us? Essays on Poetry. MATTAWA has translated numerous books of contemporary Arabic poetry and is the co-editor of 3 anthologies of Arab American literature. A MacArthur Fellow, MATTAWA teaches at the University of Michigan and edits the Michigan Quarterly Review. KHALED, salam alaikum, welcome back.
Welcome from both of us, KHALED.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you. As I mentioned to Sudeep, I was not able to get connected to the internet in my boutique hotel. So I'm taking refuge in my cousin's kitchen, and I've been keeping them away from the fridge for this hour. So we have a household of not so much poetry lovers who've been kept from the fridge. So we will see how it goes. If the world around me erupts and the hungry teenagers come to claim their sandwich bread, it's your fault. All right. So I will read a few poems. Hopefully, we'll try to keep it on the short end. But this first poem is called Shikwa, and it's the word for complaint in Arabic and Urdu. And this is a poem after the great Urdu poet Muhammad Iqbal. Brother on the threshing floor, body like wheat, and the red dirt that binds us, the fig trees, olives, and date palms, a treacherous murder unleashed upon us now, the call blazing from vanity's lungs, jutting us to a future of mindless rain, wayward blizzards and of sand and snow. We were born to ward off this desolation that grinds mountains into floss, that bores into our books for a whim that ordains blood, our blood and others, our sisters, mothers, without such fear, such hope. Who will we be? What will we do without this aching cord, without the bright morning that tore silver towers, fire and the parched red dirt that binds the water stolen from our wells, a black magic dredging the lower rungs of earth? We dream of clover. The soft scent of young lambs is the first letter of our alphabet, and the prophets who tighten ropes around their waist to stifle hunger's pangs, supplicant brows seeking light from earth's core. What will we do without the angel's voice? A tide sending us heavenward, a harmattan ushering us into the hell of its lows. How can we accept the quiet certainty of our graves? There must be shelter, we whisper to each other, beyond the sun's hardened gaze, an opening through the moonlit canopy of fronds where signs alight and prayers launch. The girls walk past, hair fluttering like commas between poems of musk, a dream of touch like water, gently falling on smooth, warm stone. Dusk commences, brings back the anemone's mournful dirge, stroking the dagger's spine, and the gelding's nightmares. Our love of the moment a gaze lingers only for our eyes is all that remains in our scoured hands. Who else will hear bird song as prayer? Who will cleanse himself with the stroke of sand? Who keeps the earth rotating with praise of your name? And what will this spinning, hurtling mean without our voices shouldering it towards some sweetened pause? What will you do, dear God, without us? How will you fare alone again in the empty vast, in the dark of your creation, without us giving you your name? All right. As you can see, folks are speaking to disrupt poetry. Nonetheless, we march on. Some for departure. Locusts wrap the sun in gauze. The river swallows its banks. No pleasure but seeing the no king crop here, the no fields, a petrified forest where twins were slain. Someone will follow a bird. The work of fire never ends. Jinn-built cities of mirage. The poor stand waiting by the shore. Signs made of stardust and spider thread. Any way you measure it, the difference will be a road. This last poem and the rest are from the title sequence of the book Fugitive Atlas, the most recent book. And they are basically trying to address and voice and explore the migrant situation that's from North Africa, through the Central Mediterranean, and other parts also from the Eastern Mediterranean, and trying to sort of voice the physical experiences, and disorientation, and the sense of loss and hope, perhaps. Agadez Blues. No place, no money for the bed. Je dors dans la rue, paid only the way. Even God can't see me here. Please take your money. Quand tu n'as pas d'argent, even God can't hear me here. Il te palpa tout le corps pour vérifier. Palpa all your body. Even God can't save me here. I paid 1,300 francs to go to Libya. Mais le chauffeur, il est parti. Even God can't help me here. Je n'ai plus rien pour manger. Je n'ai plus rien pour dormir. Even God can't find me here. Into the sea. Barely out of the jetty, the boat rises with every wave, and in the back 2 or 3 fall into the sea. At sunset, the boat starts to lose air, fills with water. Mothers and babies fall into the sea. One side stays afloat. We cling to a rope, water up to our bellies, and people fall into the sea. All night we grip and bleed. Rain so cold, waves 5 stories high. If only I could fall into the sea. Sunrise, a helicopter. I find the red shirt, wave it to them. They watch us fall into the sea. They fling a small inflatable boat. I'm too weak to reach it. Others try and fall into the sea. A cargo boat throws a rope. Get us on board, alive at last. And we still fall into the sea. Fuel burns. This is from a medical doctor's notes about what happens to people on these jetties like the one that just sank off the English Channel, and many others had sunk on the Mediterranean. Fuel burns. It's a kind of erasure. Basically, it's the doctor's words that I'm using. Fuel burns. Gasoline canisters leak or get knocked over. Gasoline mixes with seawater. And when the mixer touches human skin, skin begins to burn. Women sitting in the bottom or the center of the boat are at highest risk. Dinghies are fitted with plywood floors fixed with nails and screws that puncture people's feet. The wood soaks up water, expands, then splits. Women and children often fall through the floor or are trampled and drowned. People fight on the boat. The bodies of survivors and the dead are full of scratches, bite marks, cuts, and bruises, but it's fuel burns that horrify most. Survivors arrive hypothermic, dehydrated, barely conscious. They must shower with soap to get relief and need help stripping off their fuel-soaked clothes, but just touching their clothing can make latex gloves melt. Malouk's Qasida. Qasida is the Arabic classical form, and the basic element about the Qasida is the monorhyme at the end of the 2 or the double hemistiche line. I try to use that monorhyme, a version of it. The lines are longer in syllables than the Arabic lines. And so I'll try to get away from the sound a little bit. Maluk's Qasida. Lampedusa, only a dozen leagues now. The bay between it and Sus, a corridor of debris, a Phoenician graveyard. Are we prepared for the storm's paradise? The starlings recite the zodiacs on their wings. The marabouts must in kindness abide. On the wireless, the noises of rescue, the double dealing of virtue and abuse. Into a theater of salvation we ride. We are exalted into some hippopotamus, our mouths checked, hands gloved with inhuman skin, their fingers inside. The mouths that speak are covered like Tuaregs, the eyes swathed with a dusky mirage, our names taken, flicker like fireflies, looped around our wrists, numbers that look like a kind of price. The bullhorns cry, the seagulls deride. On slippery bridges, we're wrapped in gold foil, woozy, often diseased, but who's saving whom? The question is not stated, only implied. And for the sake of time, there's a longer qasida that I'm going to skip over. It might be in the chat. And I'll just end with this maybe more uplifting ending. We are saying yes, but who are we to say? The silence again, a wall of feathers, and near enough to block the circuit of our time. Adobe wall, roads of dust, 32 years until the bones discoursed. That's how long I've dug into myself and the baby. She is a promise, ungraspable, mist, fuss or no fuss, yearn, 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 heart pounds, ears throb. Will it ask? The question tattooed on our skin until dirt fills my grave, you say. Call it wait or rest, the stare, the lunge back into what we can't swim. Another shore now. How our arms flare, the joints acidic burn, a hunger unbeknownst to us, a flame cupped in skin, earth turning us toward a thin stream of self. Oh, anticipant, oh, dear loving Lord, to hold the burden like a need and let a new life begin. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes.
Wow, thank you so much, Khaled, for reminding us that the oratical tradition is about bearing witness and the high stakes of discourse. It's great where you're standing, by the way. Now, actually, you're much more visible than we were when you were sitting down. You're much crisper. Yeah, it's much better.
There we go.
Yes. Hello.
It's a light.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that whole. You've reminded us why the oratical tradition exists in poetry. It's a summoning to witness. It's a summoning to the great things.
Well, yes, and I kind of, I mean, to be a witness is sort of inevitable. I'm not able not to be there, not come from a troublesome place, and maybe to be attracted to it. But also, I mean, I think one way to think about this is also to think that this is, I don't mean it in a bad sense, but I mean it in the sense that this is art that that I'm working on, both the witness, the document, but also the singing, the control of the voice, the control of the utterance, that in essence, that's what gives a command of life, rather than the material difficulty and the human to human injustice that sort of silences. The poem becomes an opportunity to tinker with silence by placing words in a certain way, by emphasizing a certain musicality. And so in that sense, it becomes not just an act of witness, but an act of creation or recreation.
Absolutely. It's like the lament tradition, isn't it? Or the official mourning tradition, where spontaneous song is, but it's an art form. But you know, that's what perhaps, you know, we can.
It was very important for this work. You know, for this work, I felt like, I mean, I could have done the sort of prose blocks, kind of documentary, a lot of erasure, sort of highlighting the more sort of expository detachment. And I didn't want detachment. I want this power of fact and experience, but it's the music that will add emphasis and ownership of this experience. And I don't mean it ownership as my ownership, but ownership, voice ownership, sort of like a human embodying of drama. That's a ownership, that it's owned by a living voice.
Yeah, I mean, VAZHYNA talked, didn't she, about the labor of poetry. In that sense, there is a poetic labor in what you're doing here. You know, that's a kind of, I don't want to say duty, I don't want to put those words in your mouth. It's for you to say what those words are, but you know, this something is being made, something is being worked over. It can't be resolved except by, you know, geopolitics. But poets, you know, some work has to be done, the work of lament, the work of witness, the work of transformation, the work of digestion, the work of it, owning where you stand, the work of the discourse.
There's another, before Khaled, you can certainly address this, but I think there's one aspect which we haven't talked about, is the aspect of both immediacy, which is of course partly the events that are happening, but the whole tradition of, well, it's in Urdu and Arabic poetry, it's in the poetry of many parts of the world, including mine, which is sort of the praise song. It's dirge-like in cantatory at one level, but it's also a praise song to the larger civilizational narrative. So that's one side of it. What's also very interesting is the way you use Urdu and Arabic tradition in a very, very American space.
The only space I know.
No, which is wonderful, because, you know, if you did, for instance, just now you just said, if you did, for instance, erasure oriented poetry or prose poems, block-like prose poems for the same poems, the emphasis would have shifted, of course, but it also takes you more towards the West, the more Western tradition, visually. Whereas the way you've constructed the poems in this case, you know, in couplets and tercets and qasidas, qasida is a great, great, great tool, I think. You know, I think perhaps you should talk a little bit about that, because there's all these.
Well, I think the other aspect of that
folded rhymes.
The documentary sort of approach at times, particularly when it comes to immigrants and migrants, there is a kind of muffling that it's not the fault of translators. It is the people who are rescued or a point of rescue are in many ways turned into apprentice subjects, as one critic has called it, and they're kind of silenced into a kind of babyhood, when in fact these people sing. They're probably by singing and writing compositions about their experiences. There's a living kind of life that they have in their own languages that doesn't, or maybe sometimes to their benefit or to their detriment as well, that doesn't get across, and they come across as these sort of incomplete people. Unfortunately, the incompleteness of the migrant remains with them throughout. Once you're snatched or rescued, you are kind of incomplete. We're going to assess your situation, what kind of victim you are, etc. And in a sense, like a whole big binder of deficiencies are listed for you, when in fact you're a full-raised human being. You cross the sea, you cross deserts, you've saved up so much, worked really hard to make it to where you've reached. So there is the whole fullness that gets blunted by the system of the humanitarian system of blunting other people's humanity. So presenting these mixed traditions, adopting them, is a way of sending back a sense, well, no, this is stuff that needs to be announced its craft, and in a sense, as a dramatic gesture. And for me, I needed to deal with it. The subject matter added, the formal added more focus on the artistry rather than on the, if you will, the politics. How effective this is politically. No, I'm going to try to make it effective musically, because that's really my business. And in a sense, and that's how you cross, you penetrate. You're not making a case before a court of law. You are making a case before a court of musical listeners, people who are listening to music. You're making an argument, but you're trying to utilize the various tools of persuasion, and music and syncopation being one of those.
And it is beautifully done as well. I mean, when you see, we heard three very, very different poets, and they're all connected in one way in terms of the way you use language and the way you use sound. It was almost like being in not a quadraphonic system, not a stereophonic system, but a triangular stereo system where you hear tonalities which are beautifully measured in their own way. Valzania does it in her own way, Major does it in her own way, you do it in a different way, but they're all beautifully calibrated and balanced. You can see that the sound has been mixed in the studio with those 1,000 buttons in front. And that is...
Sorry, Sudeep, yes. And what's fascinating?
Labor, but it's also the labor of carrying the court forward, the court of poetry.
And what's fascinating is, isn't it, that both Khaled and VAZHYNA are also doing that with translation, so that translation is part of that practice. Chakravorty Spivak, talks about the hospitality in translation, making a really good translation so that a translated text comes into the host language and society on equal footing with ones originally written in the native language. And that's so true with poetry, the level of care and artistry that this extraordinarily poised musicality we've come back to again and again this afternoon requires across languages. Doing it twice over is just extraordinary.
Well, it's been great to be a company of VAZHYNA again with Major. I think he and I met for like 5 seconds, but I've been walking alongside him for 2 decades at least. So it's great to meet again.
Yeah, and it's not just that, it's sort of, this is also an act of friendship, this whole program. It's getting people together, walking together. All of us have different points, have crossed each other's lives, paths, and will do so. But more importantly, we consistently keep in touch through our art and poetry, which is the beauty of the whole thing. And yes, thank you, all three of you. I know Fiona needs to leave in 2 minutes, so do I. We can carry on and on. It's just the level of discussion with, three amazing poets is just so, it's just such that you can't stop, but we have to stop, sadly.
We have to stop. But you have honored us and inspired us this afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. And it's just been a huge privilege. I mean, what a wonderful way to end a year of extraordinary readings. I mean, Major, VAZHYNA, Khaled. I mean, thank you all three so much. It's just really, really special. Please, let's all stay in touch and see what 2022 brings.
Yes, and thank you for the sort of the audience. Many people in the audience come back every month to listen to this. So just to let you know, the entire thing is archived on the net. It's on the YouTube channels. Dawn will very quickly put it up on Facebook. It's already been currently being live streamed on Facebook and YouTube. But it'll all be available. It's for free access. It's for everybody. And what Don didn't tell you before when he was introducing you three is he actually sends it out to about 200 different colleges and universities, and these are used as masterclass modules as well. So it's a wonderful resource. Thank you, Fiona, for being part of it. It's a real joy.
It is, Sudeep. It was so great when we dreamt up this idea a year ago. If you remember, it was last December, and I said, well, why do we have to do a print anthology? Why don't we do it? You know, why don't we do a podcast? Why don't we do it live? And it's been a joy because, of course, there has been plenty of print during lockdown, but there hasn't been, well, by now there's lots of Zoom, but to see each other's faces, to hear it live has just been wonderful. I'm so glad you wanted to be part of this, Sudeep. And we must thank Don again. We must thank all our regulars. And here's to 2022.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Happy New Year and Merry Christmas. And thank you, Don. And thank you, all of you.
مع السلامة. All right. Okay.